More countries around the world are cracking down on long-stay tourists. Today I'm going to share with you the latest story of Mexico and how they're trying to get rid of people who are living in Mexico as tourists. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs legally go where you're treated best. And I want to be clear before we start today's episode. I'm not talking about a tourist crackdown on people who are coming to Mexico and really to any other country for a week or 2 weeks or probably even a month or even longer. What I'm talking about is you have countries around the world. We've talked about this to some extent, but now it's extending to even relatively flexible countries like Mexico, where countries don't want people living there as perpetual tourists. I haven't seen this as much recently because we've been working with a lot more people looking to build Plan Bs, people who are leaving the US or Australia or Germany or wherever for the first time. And so we have not been working with as many people who are traveling. And the people who are traveling, they've oftentimes get a residence permit, which, spoiler alert, is the solution to solving this problem. But what you have is countries who have had very flexible visa regimes. Mexico, for example, has a 180-day stay. That's the same as the United Kingdom. And interestingly enough, it is easier to get a second passport that will grant you visa-free access to the UK. All the Caribbean citizenship by investment programs, for example, those passports offer access to the UK. None of them offer access to Mexico. Now, Mexico offers a relatively easy visa to get with a little bit of bureaucracy. It's a relatively straightforward residence permit to get. But if you just want to visit Mexico, that's difficult on most second passports, but it's relatively easy on the US, Canada, EU, Australia, all the developed country passports. And so for the longest time, people have been able to go for 180 days, no questions asked, come on in. I remember, they've changed this recently, but there have been times where you could just walk into Mexico from the US border. Nobody really cared. They're really starting to crack down on that because there's really not that many countries where you just walk into the country and they don't even care, or where you come for 6 months and they don't ask you questions. The UK also has, as I said, this 180-day policy. You go to the UK, you can bet you they're going to ask you how long you're going to stay there. And I can tell you, I was in Europe recently, and I overheard a family being asked, how long they were going to stay there, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to be here for 2 months," and the person's like, "2 months? You're going to come here for 2 months?" What are you doing for 2 months? You better have a reason for why you're going to spend 2 months. You get 180 days, and I suppose if you have a plan for that, hey, come on in. But they're going to want to know that you're not coming there to work. And so Mexico is always more flexible on this. But what's happened recently is INM, that's Mexico's basically Immigration Institute, has tasked various bureaus around the country to, number one, within their own ranks, be more strict in letting people in and making sure that people are there for legitimate reasons. But also, if they think someone is illegal, to check up on that when people are around the country. And so one of the things that they are advising now in Mexico is carry your immigration card that you get when you come into the country and carry your passport with you just in case something happens. I've been going to Mexico for a long time. This is obviously a newer issue. I haven't seen this. I was in Mexico a couple months ago for Nomad Capitalist Live. I never have any issues going to Mexico. They always treat me very well. But they are now recommending to carry around a passport, to carry around your immigration card, just in case there is an issue. And so what they're doing on the immigration side is they are, in some cases, starting to ask, hey, how long are you here? What are you here to do? Hey, I'm going to Nomad Capitalist Live. That's fantastic. How long are you going to be here? 10 days. All right. And they might make a note. Okay, you get 30 days in the country, right? What they're starting to do is make the period of the tourist stamp related to what you're actually there to do. Because what they really want to discourage is people who do the 6 months or the 180, leave sometimes for as little as a day, and then come back in as a 180. Now, I've always suggested that while Mexico has kind of an odd tax system compared to many others we deal with, if you're spending more than 6 months in Mexico in a calendar year, you're opening yourself up to some risk depending on your status there, depending on whether you own property, depending on other factors. So I wouldn't necessarily want to take that risk without getting proper tax advice. I think that's one step a lot of people overlooked. Certainly if you're paying taxes somewhere else, that's one thing. But if you're just living in Mexico and getting out of taxes in your home country by being a tax non-resident, that's another thing. And so definitely they're being a little bit more particular. Does that really affect most people in the concept of I'm going to spend 6 months. No, I spent 2 months in Mexico in basically April and May of 2021. I had no problems. I left, there's no problems. And I do think I got the 180 days. But what they're doing is, I think this is largely aimed at people who are just kind of coming perpetually, where they're starting to kind of lose their patience. We've talked about it a couple of years ago. That was happening in Thailand. We have talked about it happening in Japan. Certainly, some of the European countries, that's an issue. People have asked me, hey, if I have 2 different passports, can I kind of go in and out of these countries in one passport now, one passport later? That used to work more. I never really encouraged it. But I think now countries are pretty well organized in terms of their systems that, listen, if you're supposed to spend 90 days out of every 180 in Europe, that's exactly what I would do. I would either get a residence permit and live in Europe, whether it's a golden visa, some kind of self-sufficient visa. If you want to live in Europe, I would do that because you get half the time. Mexico never really had that. Again, it was just 180 per visit. As long as you came in and out, they just figured, hey, we can assess you every 180 days maximum. And if we ever get sick of you, then we'll let you know. And nobody really had a problem. I think that, certainly people who kind of come and go, where there's actually some kind of pattern that you're not living there, you come for a couple months, you leave for a while, you come back, are probably going to have fewer issues. Certainly there are a number of stories out there, and I'll share those in a minute. But what they're really looking at is saying, you know what, if you want to live here, and that's the pattern you're displaying, get a residence permit. And so they're encouraging people to apply for temporary or permanent residence if you want to make sure that you're going to get the full 6 months. By the way, if you go and apply for that, I think if you're a Western citizen, they're going to be pretty lenient, depending on where you're applying in terms of granting that. Sometimes they'll ask you like, well, how long are you planning to stay there? And they might just push you to go as a tourist. And so they're doing that. They have a regularization program for folks who have been living there under these kind of odd circumstances to kind of get up to date, get you into a temporary residence. Certainly some people have to pay a fine, which is not terrible to fix that. Some of the stories that I've read, a Canadian who stayed in Mexico for about a year before on 2 different tourist visas, making them on a perpetual visa, was told upon entry that they don't grant 180 anymore. They were only giving 60 days at a time. Someone with no history of traveling to Mexico was granted 60 days based on their being there for, or they're saying, hey, I'm going to be here for a couple weeks. So they are, I think, more flexible in my experience than some countries. I mean, you go to like some of these pretty strict by-the-book countries, and you just say, hey, here's my hotel for 11 days. I got a visa once, I don't remember where, but I had to show like where I was going. It was like an hour by hour itinerary. It wasn't really as bad as it sounded. But I think when I got there, they're like, all right, 11 days, here's your 12 days. That's what you get. Another story, they're now writing exact dates on how long a person should stay. And so, I think they're just basically saying, if you're going to live here, get a temporary visa, get a residence permit, or get a permanent residence permit. Not everyone will easily qualify for a permanent residence permit, but temporary residence isn't that bad. Mexico is interesting. You really don't need to invest in the country. You don't really have to necessarily spend all your time there to have the permit. So it's a relatively flexible program. But definitely, my advice as the world gets more tough, this is not necessarily a Mexico thing. I think that there are some people who are kind of doing the perpetual travel who have perhaps made a bigger deal of this than needs to be made of it. This is the way the entire world is going. And this is why I've said, among other reasons, have residence permits. If you can get a permanent residence permit, it's stronger. Obviously, U.S. green card, besides the tax implications. If you're not living in the U.S., you're not keeping your green card. In a country like Mexico, permanent residence is much more permanent. If you can get permanent, great. If you can get temporary, fine. If you can get citizenship in a certain country, which in Mexico you can't, you've got to put in the time first, then do that, great. Give yourself a higher level of access than tourists, because I can tell you, coming in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, countries around the world are really becoming difficult on that. And so it's all the more reason to have your ducks in a row. Another thing I'll say to those of you who are showing up in your sweatpants, those of you I see walking by my 1D as you get on the plane and walk by me, that are in tawdry attire. I think that I've always thought there are certain countries where they want you to be dressed a certain way, just as there are countries where if you're a woman and you're wearing something low cut and maybe they get in your case for that. I think dressing professionally helps. One reason I think that I always get taken relatively seriously, I don't have too many problems, is I always dress relatively well when I'm flying. I'm 6'4", which is, I guess, almost 2 meters. I carry myself. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. I answer questions succinctly. I'm not fumbling for my documents. I do carry, and I do this more now than when I was a U.S. citizen, just in case people are like, where's this passport? I do carry on my phone, and sometimes even a hard copy of hotel reservation, stuff like that, just so I can show, I carry some cash with me if they want to know how I'm going to support myself in case a metal credit card doesn't convince them. But I think you want to present yourself well. And I think that, when I go to Mexico, certainly Cancun, for example, you see people dressed a little bit casually. Perhaps not the best way to get yourself the maximum visa potential. So the advice is, know where you're staying. If you're going to Mexico as a tourist, if you're going to other countries as a tourist, I really think that some of the stuff is overblown. Even some of the more strict countries, you tell them what you're doing there. They ask you some questions. As long as you're telling the truth, they're looking to trip you up. If you're telling the truth, they're going to let you go. Okay? They may not give you the full 180 days in some of these countries, although again, generally I've gotten it because I'm not living there. But if you want to live in a country, get a residence permit. So if you want to live in Thailand, get the Thai Elite visa, get the Thai Investors visa, get yourself set up. If you want to live in Malaysia, MM2H is open again, do that. If you want to live in Mexico, do that. Certain countries do require you to live there for a certain period of time, like some of the Central American countries do require 6 months. So I think that there's definitely some lifestyle planning. This is a conversation I'm having with people that I'm working with more recently is, where do you plan to live? Where do we need residence permits? Maybe where can you just be a tourist? Where are you a citizen? Because this is getting more difficult. The perpetual traveler is not going to work as much anymore. That said, if you have a residence permit in Mexico, that does not mean that you are a taxpayer in Mexico. If you go down and spend a couple months, if you do your proper tax planning, if you're not spending the requisite amount of time or the requisite connections, don't confuse residence with tax residence. I think people have kind of done this perpetual nomad tourist visa thing, thinking they're avoiding taxes. I think in a properly structured plan, having residence permits, having things organized, is going to allow for a better tax plan potentially than just being a tourist. So that's what's happening in Mexico. I think you're going to see more of it around the world. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.